Welcome to another episode of the Carolyn Glick Show. We've had some really startling developments here in Israel since our last show, and I just want to go over the one that I find most startling. Israel today, as Prime Minister designate Benjamin Netanyahu and his coalition partners move pretty quickly towards signing and completing their coalition deals that will form the basis of their new government. We're seeing a multifaceted challenge to Israel's democratic governance on the part of the outgoing government led by Yair Lapid, the outgoing prime minister, and his coalition partners in his party, in the Yesh Atid party, in Benny Gantz's party, in the Labor Party, and then from outside groups as well. Essentially, the losing parties in Israel's elections are presenting Israel domestically and internationally as if we're two separate nations. The first nation, of course, is theirs and it's democratic. It has all the right values, it has all the right policies. And the incoming Netanyahu government and its voters are the dark forces in Israeli society. They're illegitimate, they're anti democratic, misogynist, xenophobic, racist. Homophobic, fascist, you name it. It's all of those, and in a bag of chips, as a friend of mine would say. Um, and there are unsettled calls by Lapid and his colleagues to the legal fraternity here in Israel, led by the Supreme Court, to block the Knesset's ability to legislate, to block the incoming government's ability to govern from the bench and from the legal advisor's office. Lapid met with the general staff of the IDF last week and essentially encouraged them to rebel against Netanyahu and his government and to reject its authority to give orders, which is, among other things, a call for rebellion, which is a felony in this country, but who cares? He wrote a letter from the prime minister's office on the prime minister's office letterhead to the heads of local governing authorities in Israel, calling for them not to work with the incoming government and not to accept legitimacy of its education policies and its other social policies. This is something that is unprecedented in Israeli history. I mean, it's a call for rebellion. And You have other people in the outgoing coalition. You have two former IDF chiefs of staff, Gadi Eisenkot, who is, I think, number three in former IDF chief of staff and current outgoing defense minister Benny Gantz's party. He, together with former prime minister, former defense minister, former chief of staff of the IDF, Ehud Barak, have called for 1 million Israelis to go to the streets to oppose the incoming government. And again, the government hasn't even been formed. It hasn't been sworn in. It hasn't implemented one policy. But there are calls for open rebellion, 1 million people going into the streets. What is that really a call for? It's a call for January 6th on steroids. It's a call for civil war. That's what it's a call for. All that they're doing is putting people into a tinder box, and at whatever moment they choose, they'll light a match. That's what's happening right now in Israel. We've never seen anything like it before. Never. It's incredibly dangerous and it's incredibly irresponsible. And yes, it's incredibly anti democratic. You have a resounding victory for the right wing bloc led by Benjamin Netanyahu to form the next government. They're about to form the next government. They're moving fairly systematically. I would say it's too slow for my taste, but that's what we have. And they're doing it very methodically, and they're building a coalition that they hope is going to stand the test of time. And all of the slings and of outrageous fortune and arrows of outrageous fortune that the opposition is now throwing at them. But the opposition, of course, isn't only directing its efforts at what they're going to be doing inside of Israel, but they're also pushing out this message of the fundamental illegitimacy and evil of the forces of darkness that are forming the next government under Netanyahu to the international community. And we're seeing that their messages are resonating in the noxious coverage that Netanyahu and his allies are receiving, particularly in the American media. Last week, I wrote an article about this that's appearing this week in Newsweek. Two senior Middle East hands in the foreign policy establishment in Washington, former U.S. Ambassador to Israel Dan Kurtzer and former Deputy Envoy for Middle East Peace under, I think, three administrations, David Miller penned an article in the Washington Post where they called for the Biden administration to adopt a viciously hostile policy towards Israel, really adopting the positions that are being pushed out by anti-Israel legislators like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Rashida Tlaib and others. Kurtzer and Aaron Miller, who are also prominent in the American Jewish community, called for the Biden administration to adopt anticipatory sanctions against the incoming Israeli government and against Israel in anticipation of that government being sworn in. Among other things, they called for the United States to place an embargo on the sale of offensive weapon systems to Israel. They called on the United States, on the Biden administration, which, as we know, is incredibly hostile towards Israel, right, to stop U.S. support for Israel at the United Nations, at the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court at The Hague. These are the policies that have been advocated by administration members like Maher Bitar and Hadi Amar, who are respectively the head of intelligence at the National Security Council and the newly minted envoy to the Palestinians of the Biden administration. So these are viciously anti-Israel policies. They've also called for incoming ministers in Israel's government from the religious Zionism party, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, to be treated as persona non grata, and for the United States government not to work with them, which is incredible. And then finally, and most astonishingly, Kurtzer and Miller, again, two prominent members of the U.S. foreign policy establishment on the Middle East, and also two prominent members of the American Jewish communities, called on the administration to punish Israel's peace partners in the Arab world in the Abraham Accords, to strike out against Morocco, Bahrain, the UAE, and Sudan for effectively ending the Palestinian veto over the peace between Israel and the Arab world by signing the Abraham Peace Accords, with Israel not first kowtowing and accepting every Palestinian demand, which cumulatively and separately would lead to the destruction of the Jewish state. So, I mean, these are the policies that they're pushing for, and they're doing so. They're justifying this by aping the language, by mimicking, by speaking the language that Lapid is creating with his policy, with his actions to demonize the incoming Israeli government and to incite a rebellion against it, again, before it's even been formed. They telegraphed their plan, Lapid and his colleagues, and also their friends on the other side of the pond in the United States. They telegraphed their intention to demonize this government, for the past many years by demonizing Netanyahu and demonizing the Israeli right as the forces of darkness, as somehow, inherently criminal and evil and people who must be, kept away from power at all costs. And now they're actually implementing this policy towards an elected government in Israel. Again, we're going into very dark times, and I'm going to have as my guest on this program today a very dear old friend of mine, Mort Klein, who's the president of the Zionist Organization of America. We're planning on talking about how the American Jewish community is dealing with rising anti-Semitism in Israel. And I think one of the points that you have to look to is that when you look at the Israeli left demonizing their political opponents on the right, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, starting with him and moving down the list, they are making it possible for American Jews to abandon Israel and to not understand that by abandoning their support for the state of Israel, they're also harming their ability to fight against the rising anti-Semitism that's directed against them personally, directly. Anyway, that's what's happening here. It's alarming. Obviously, we'll continue to inform you about the situation on JNS, and I, of course, will do so in my writings. But it's very important for all of you to understand where we stand. And without further ado, I want to turn to my conversation with Mort Klein, the president of the ZOA. talk about what's happening specifically in the American Jewish community, vis-a-vis Israel and vis-a-vis the fight against anti-Semitism. So thanks so much. I'm so happy to have with me today Mort Klein, the head of ZOA, the president of the Zionist Organization of America. Mort and I have known each other for a few years, but he's been, for many years, in fact, but he's been president of the ZOA throughout all of them, which makes sense because I may have known him a long time, but I haven't known him 29 years. And at the end of December, he will be entering into his 30th year as the president of the ZOA. Mort is one of the most outspoken champions of a strong U.S.-Israel alliance and of strong Zionism and support among American Jews for Israel, probably the strongest, most consistent voice on these very important topics. So we have a lot to discuss. So without further ado, I just want to welcome you, Mort, to the Carolyn Glick Show. It's about time I have you here, so I'm glad you're here.
It's great to be with the greatest journalist on the Arab-Israeli situation in the world, Caroline Glick. It's a great honor to be with someone as talented, gifted, and as activist as you are.
Well, obviously, I have to have you on more often if that's how you refer to
Your
me.
mother told me to say that. I'm doing this for her.
Okay, well, all right, that's fine. I'll let her know that you said that, and I'll see what she says. She'll probably say, well, maybe I did, maybe I didn't. What's it to you? Anyway, so listen, I wanted to start I want to talk to you today about the growing the rise of anti-Semitism, the open, in-your-face, can't deny anti-Semitism in the United States. And I was with you just last month. I had the honor of joining you at the ZOA Awards dinner, your annual dinner, and you bestowed a very extraordinary award on former President Donald Trump for his great friendship with Israel and all the wonderful things that he's done for Israel. He did as president for Israel, including moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, ending U.S. support for the terror, supporting Palestinian Authority, and so many other things that he did that were important. And also for his fight against anti-Semitism in the United States on college campuses. And then, lo and behold, about a week after we had dinner with President Trump, he had dinner with two anti-Semites, maybe three, I'm not quite sure, but certain Kanye West has become sort of a combination Louis Farrakhan and Father Coughlin over the past several weeks, and he had him over to dinner again with Kanye's new sidekick, Nick Fuentes, and I personally felt like it was a gut punch on the part of Trump doing this, and he sort of pulled the wind out of the sails of his supporters, his Jewish supporters in the United States by doing this. And I know that you put out a statement on it, but I wanted, before we expand the discussion, I just want to get your thoughts on what happened there and how you look at it, because he's been such an extraordinary friend. And then he went and did this. How do you look at it?
Look, Donald Trump has said many times how delighted he is that Kanye West has said great things about him. So obviously, a guy like West salves President Trump's ego, and he likes that. Also, he may think, I don't know this, that by being close to a major black icon, maybe this will help him get more black votes in his quest to become president again. I don't know. But with respect to bringing these two anti-Semites, one's a Holocaust-denying anti-Semite, that's Nick Fuentes.
Actually, I think that Kanye also denied the Holocaust when he was on the Alex Jones show.
And this week, of course, he publicly praised, disgracefully and frighteningly, Adolf Hitler and Nazis. All we ask Donald Trump, President Trump, to do is repudiate him. Just say his remarks are disgraceful. I condemn them. They have no place in American society, and I will certainly not have anything further to do with these people. And it would have gone away. That's all he had to do. I can't understand why he refused to say anything against them. In fact, even a month ago when he was asked about this before the dinner, all he said was Kanye West has said some rough things about the Jews. That's all he would say. It's not enough. There has to be consequences to this type of Jew hatred by prominent icons, which helps legitimize and mainstream anti Semitism. And Donald Trump, who did extraordinary things for the Jewish state of Israel, like no one else. Despite that, we were the only Jewish group to have recognized him and told him, we thank you for all this. No one else did. And yet he really disappointed us by simply not repudiating them. He didn't have to apologize. He didn't have to do anything except repudiate them. It would have gone away. I don't know why he refused to do that, but he did.
It's really interesting because I mean, I kind of feel like I mean, you condemned the meeting. David Friedman, his ambassador to Israel, condemned the meeting as well. I mean, people who are very close to him in the
Jason
Jewish
Greenblatt,
community
Elon Carr,
have
people close to him.
so okay. I haven't been finding it. So yeah, so all of the Jewish Americans who were working with him most closely during his presidency have all condemned the meeting and asked him to repudiate Kanye West, and he hasn't done that yet. And I find that so amazing. And the other thing that I find really disturbing is that this meeting where he really did do something that deserves to be condemned because it was very dangerous. I mean, Kanye West, it really is sort of this meeting point between. I talked about it with Pastor Dumisani Washington on my show last week, that he really has become this meeting point between Black anti-Semitism of the Nation of Islam and Black Israelite variety and white supremacism, white neo-Nazi anti-Semitism. And this is something that I don't remember that we've seen. Dumisani said that Malcolm X identified the uh, the cooperation, the collaboration between the Ku Klux Klan and the Nation of Islam before he was assassinated. But I don't think that we've had any discussion of these sorts of things. We certainly haven't seen it personified in one person the way we're seeing it now with Kanye West. And I have this sense that for 6 years now, since Donald Trump announced that or since he received the Republican nomination in 2016, that the American Jewish community, the liberal dominated American Jewish community, has been condemning him as an anti Semite for nothing for so long that now that he's actually done something that really is alarming, I'm not sure how convincing a case that they can make, because it's been, he did the exact opposite of what he was accused of doing, of being an anti Semite, of courting anti-Semites, and of not being a friend to the American Jewish community, first and foremost, putting aside for a second his extraordinary support for the U.S.-Israel alliance. That now that actually something has happened that really is alarming, with his meeting with Kanye West in the middle of a tear of anti-Semitism on West's part, together with his execrable campaign manager, Nick Fuentes. That who's gonna listen to them? And what do you think?
No, I'm afraid that President Trump has just added to the legitimacy and mainstreaming of Jew hatred and Israel bashing. And I think this increased anti Semitism has really made it easy for Joe Biden to appoint many people who are extremely hostile to Israel in important posts. Every single person Biden has appointed to an important post affecting Israel is hostile to Israel. I can mention a couple of them if you like. I mean,
Yeah, I think it's important to go through the
I
list.
mean, Hadi Amar was just
Oh, wait, before you go through the list, before you go through the list, can I just interrupt you for 1 second? Because I think that it's important before we segue into Joe Biden, because I think that there are two things here. When you say that when by meeting with Kanye West and refusing to disavow this person and to condemn him and to say that it was a mistake and that he won't do it again, that Trump is actually legitimizing his voice. Um, that it's happening at a time when, on the one hand, it's very easy for the dominant voices in the American Jewish community to condemn him because they've been condemning him for everything. And I worry that when somebody like Jonathan Greenblatt from the ADL attacks Trump for meeting with Kanye West because he's been over the top for so long in his condemnation of Trump, when Trump has never been responsible for the kinds of things that Greenblatt and the ADL have been accusing him of doing, that now that he says it, people aren't going to take him seriously. People on the right will take him less seriously. People on the right will be less concerned about what he's saying now, when actually this is when, Trump has to be made also to account for what he's doing. But that's one aspect. And the other aspect is that this meeting, like you said, is happening in a context of a lot more and a lot more dangerous types of anti-Semitism that are being advanced in the Biden administration. So, yeah, first of all, let's talk about who we're talking about, and then let's talk
First of
about
all,
what we're
ADL's
talking about,
Jonathan
what to do.
Greenblatt has no credibility in criticizing Donald Trump when he has praised Ilhan Omar for her commitment to a more just world. Ilhan Omar, of course, is the radical anti-Israel Jew hater from Minnesota, a congresswoman, who has said that Jews are bribing congressmen to do what Israel wants, supports boycotting Israel, calls Israel an evil country, and yet he praised her, and he's really never criticized the really important people in official roles in government and in Congress that affect Israel. For example, as I said, Hadi Amar just was elevated to a very responsible, more important post, having more influence and power over the Arab-Israeli situation. And it's remarkable that Jewish leaders or Israeli leaders or anyone has attacked him. Hadi Amar has condemned the killing of Hamas terrorists. He's against U.S. military aid. He says America must not veto anti-Israel UN resolutions because it'll only come back to bite us. And he accused Israel of ethnic cleansing, being an apartheid state. And most horrifyingly, he says, I am inspired by the Intifada. He says, I'm inspired by a terror war where they've murdered and maimed 10,000 Jews. Where is ADL screaming about this? Where's AJ Committee? Where's AIPAC? Where are Israel leaders? Why aren't Israel leaders saying, we are not going to deal with this man. You'll have to give us someone else. And he's not alone. Mahir Bitar is director of intelligence at the National Security Council, who every year had a conference that he headed at Georgetown University, how to demonize Israel. He's on the board of Students for Justice in Palestine, a vicious Jew-hating, Israel-bashing group. And he says the reason there's no peace is because Israel will not allow millions of refugees to move back into Israel. It's absurd. And of course, he accused them of apartheid. And look, even Anthony Blinken this week brought Ilhan Omar, the Jew hater, to Qatar, elevating her, showing her respect, and announcing he's going to speak at the Israel-bashing organization, J Street. Where are Jewish leaders on this? Yes, Trump has been appropriately criticized for what he did, but Hadi Amar is much worse and much more dangerous. Mahir Bitar, Blinken's actions. Why is Israel and Jewish leaders silent? It's really frightening. There has to be consequences to people who are promoting and stating about Israel in a harmful and outrageous, disgraceful way. We haven't seen it, and I don't understand it. I've asked other Jewish leaders to speak out about these people, and they say it's not a good idea, not now. It'll upset the administration. You'll make it worse, which is the old fear that Jews have. By speaking out, you'll make it worse. We can no longer be the Shah Shtil Jew. We have to speak out about every one of these appointments. President Biden couldn't keep making one terrible appointment that affects Israel after another if Jewish leaders would have been speaking out about these people. By the way, even Avril Haines, the head of the National Security Council, who's Jewish, has condemned Israeli violence and terrorism, and says the Democratic platform.
She's a director of National Intelligence.
National Security Council. She's director of the National Security Council. And
I thought she was director of National Intelligence, the DIA.
Oh, well. And it's quite interesting. Why is it when Robert Malley was appointed to be the lead negotiator for Iran under Obama, this terrible man who's against sanctions on Iran, who says we should negotiate with Hamas, who says it's okay if Iran gets nuclear weapons. When he was appointed by Malley, the Jewish community did speak out strongly, and yet now they're silent. They've said not a word. I don't understand what's going on, but I'll tell you for sure, the Jewish leadership has failed in protecting Israel and Jews. They failed, and people should be calling them out for this.
That's actually a good question because, when Obama appointed Chuck Hagel to be the defense secretary, there was a huge outcry, right? I mean, among American Jews, AIPAC, if I'm not mistaken, actually tried to fight his appointment because of his long record of bashing Israel. And yet we see, and Robert Malley as well, was highly controversial. Samantha Power was highly controversial, and they faced significant headwinds in their Senate confirmation hearings. And yet, under Biden, nobody really faced any scrutiny in their Senate confirmation hearings. There was never, from the American Jewish community, there was from Republicans, but you didn't really hear an outcry from organizations like the American Jewish Committee, from AIPAC, from ADL, over these people's long histories of anti-Semitism. Why do you think that is? What changed between, Chuck Hagel being appointed? I think that was he at the beginning of Obama's second term, if I'm not mistaken. What's
It
that?
could be. That's when it was.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, why was it possible to fight Hagel, but it wasn't possible to fight, um, like you said, Meyer Bitar or Hadi Amar or Avril Haines or any of these other
Or
people.
even Jean Pierre, the spokeswoman, who organized a
Yeah, who
campaign
is
to
extremely
stop
anti-Semitic. Right.
officials from going to AIPAC's conference, and no one said a word about her being appointed the spokesperson.
APAC didn't say a word
No, they
about it.
didn't.
I mean, APAC, who was her direct victim, said
My
nothing.
my
Why?
speculation. Look, it's a very important question. I would like to answer myself. My speculation is that Jewish leaders and Jewish organizations have been, in some part, convinced by the lying propaganda against Israel that they're oppressing Arabs, that there's an occupation of their land, um, that Israel's building settlements all over Judea and Samaria, when in fact they're not. I think the propaganda since '93, and of course even before, that's been going on for almost 30 years, has convinced now many of the leaders that Israel is wrong, that Israel is making mistakes. They can't stand people screaming about the occupation, even though there is no occupation. This was never Arab land. And no Jewish leader, no Israeli leader pushes back on it. And I think that Jewish leaders are now tired of fighting. They think Israel is wrong. They've been convinced by the propaganda. It's affected them. And that's why they don't want to fight about the Hadi Amars and the Maher Bidhars. They just want this Arab war against Israel to end.
You actually think that the American Jewish leaders themselves have gone full on J Street, that they're basically, that's where they are, that they don't believe in the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in the land of
No, of
Israel?
course they believe that, but not past the 67 line. They believe fervently we have to set up a Palestinian state. Many of the leaders will publicly, of course, almost all of them support a two-state solution. ZOA is alone in opposing it because it'll be a terrorist state. Yes, of course, they support Israel's right to exist within the 67 line, but they think Israel should unilaterally be giving land away and setting up a state, thinking that'll end the problem. They ignore the fact that when that happened in Gaza, we got 25,000 rockets, Israel did, from Hamas. It won't work. Appeasement has always failed throughout history. But yes,
Do you do you think that that Israel is to blame for not standing up for, I mean, do you think that if Israel were more forthrightly asserting its rights to Judea and Samaria and the strategic necessity of maintaining control over it, that American Jews would change their views of these
Israeli
things?
prime ministers should be speaking out loudly that there's no occupation, there was never such a country, and discuss all the issues proving there's no occupation. They should be speaking out about Mahmoud Abbas. I speak at college campuses. All the kids think Mahmoud Abbas is a mainstream peace seeker, a moderate peace seeker, when he's a monster, right? He calls the Jews filth. He's denied the Holocaust. He says no Jew will be allowed in the Palestinian state. He names school streets and sports teams after Jew killers. He's anti-gay. He's anti-woman. No one knows any of these things. Why aren't the
Yeah, but I mean, let me just ask you, let me just put it a little bit more clearly. I mean, Netanyahu has come to the United States and made the case. President Trump's deal of the century placed, complete control for security in Judea and Samaria in Israel's hand and saw Israel asserting its sovereignty over 30% of Judea and Samaria from the outset of the plan. I mean, that was the deal, that it was going to include, that sovereign Israel would expand to include all of the areas of Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, as well as the eastern frontier of the country in the Jordan Valley. So I mean, and the American Jewish community, their reception of the Trump plan was very cool at best. But Israeli leaders have been, I mean, in recent years, I'm thinking of Benjamin Netanyahu, I'm thinking of Ron Dermer. I mean, they have been making this case very, very strongly, from what I've seen. And yet nobody is willing to listen to them. I mean, it's not simply that Israel is making the case, and it seems as though the American Jewish community is not interested in hearing it.
Netanyahu had a chance to declare sovereignty over small parts of Judea and Samaria? He didn't do it. Netanyahu had a 10-month freeze. He wouldn't build, sending a message it's not really Jewish land. Why is he not building? Netanyahu publicly proclaimed his support for a Palestinian state, which will be a terrorist state. Netanyahu has refused to build a single new community in Judea and Samaria or in Area E1, the area between Ma'ale Adumim and Jerusalem, to connect them.
Well, that's not actually true. I mean, I don't want to get into the weeds, but there have been a few communities that have been built in the past decade by Netanyahu governments, and the Jewish community of Judea and Samaria doubled under his
doubled
premiership. So I
within
mean,
the
it's not.
existing
I don't
within
want
the
to.
existing boundaries of those communities, not.
I don't know. I mean, my community of Efrat, we have two new neighborhoods, and that are further to the north, closer to Bethlehem,
Well, not.
and I mean, it's not all black and white. I mean, there has been a lot of building, but that's not exactly the point. What I'm saying is that Israeli leaders have stated this, but I do want to just get to another thing that I saw on the news that flashed just before we started this conversation, which was that. The American Jewish leadership I don't know whether you're included in that. I kind of assume that you're not, but I wanted to ask you about that. That American Jewish leaders have been invited to the White House to meet with senior officials, they won't say whom, this week to discuss rising anti-Semitism in the United States. And First of all, I wanted to ask, are you on the guest list? Are you planning
As
on
two of
going to the
the
White House
Jewish
to talk about
leaders who are going
anti-Semitism?
said to me, "You see, Mort, you never should have on your website a list of all the hostile to Israel appointments that Biden's made, and that's why you're not invited." No, I have not been invited. They consider me hostile.
I can't say I've.
They can.
So you're hostile because you attack them for actually advancing
Right.
anti-Semites, and then so if so, here's two questions that I want to ask you about that meeting to which you weren't invited. If you had been invited, what would you have said to whoever the senior administration officials are there?
I would have said, first of all, you should make it clear that America will no longer fund the Palestinian Authority as long as they pay Arabs to murder Jews, as the Taylor Force Act requires. That should be first. And I would also, of course, talk about the trouble of him elevating Hadi Amar to a more important role, a man who's been extraordinarily hostile to Israel. And why has he not appointed even a single person friendly to Israel in any of these important posts? And finally, I would say it is critically important for the administration to publicly condemn by name Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Betty McCollum, AOC, Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, by name as vicious anti-Semites, urge that they be thrown off of every committee, and apologize and Biden should apologize for publicly praising Rashida Tlaib, where he called her a passionate woman, a fighter. God has blessed you for being a fighter. I think it would go when anti-Semites or people who feel negatively toward Jews see that there are a dozen now of anti-Semites in Congress, and they get away with it, and they're given respect the way this administration has. It only encourages them to go public and to be more open about their hatred toward Jews and toward Israel. That would be very important. But instead, they've embraced these people. And even Pelosi has refused to condemn any of them by name, just put out a general statement about anti-Semitism. And she took a picture with three of them for the cover of Rolling Stone magazine with three anti-Semites. That's what I would be saying to them. And by the way, I can assure you, none of that will be said to these people, to Biden and his people at this meeting. They'll be too afraid.
What do you think? What do you expect will happen at this meeting?
I don't know. I assume Joe Biden or his people simply reassert their commitment to a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. They're just a platitude, and maybe say they'll speak out more about anti-Semitism in general. But they should be condemning by name Students for Justice in Palestine. They should be condemning Berkeley, which has allowed 14 clubs to say, if you support Israel's right to exist, we don't want you here. The administration should be condemning them publicly. They're not going to do it. And the Jewish leadership, I don't believe, is going to demand they do it. So I don't see anything positive coming out of this meeting. I hope I'm wrong.
Well, I'm sure that they're going to condemn Trump for meeting with
Oh,
Kanye.
they've done that, but they never condemned Omar, Tlaib, AOC, or any of these other people. And they would have if the Jewish leadership had demanded it. But Jewish leaders have said almost nothing about these people.
Right. So I want to shift gears a second to what Abe Foxman, Jonathan Greenblatt's predecessor, long-standing head of the ADL, said in a stunning interview with the Jerusalem Post over the weekend. He said that his support for Israel is conditional on Israel essentially not being led by the Likud. I mean, he gave he gave a lot of uh, he was very verbose in what he was saying, but I mean, it boiled down to brass tacks. Abe Foxman said that if the Israeli government doesn't follow the line that he supports in terms of domestic policy, in terms of religious policy, and in terms of its policy towards the Palestinians, uh, then he's not going to support Israel anymore. And that really goes to the question of when I asked you, well, are they even Zionist anymore? I mean, what does that mean that your support for Israel is conditional? We're facing existential threats from several directions at once, starting with Iran, moving to its proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and also from genocidal anti-Semitism that is rising throughout the world and that is predicated on Palestinian Jew hatred, which says that we're not a nation, we don't have, our history is fraudulent, which they appropriate to themselves, and that our land belongs to them. And so you look at this and you say, what do you mean your support for Israel is conditional? It seems so extraordinary to me. And he said it with a straight face. And obviously, you look at his predecessor and the fact that he's essentially ended the ADL's existence as a Jewish organization and turned it into just a progressive pressure group against conservatives. So I mean, but he really was always sort of seen as where the center of the American Jewish community is, and he's saying that his support for Israel is conditional. How would you respond to
First of
that?
all, what he's done, of course, is an absolute disgrace. I'm putting out a statement tomorrow condemning him for it. He's my friend. I know him very well. I mean, he sees that the New York Times has hired a journalist, I didn't even mention his name, who now writes articles that Israel shouldn't even exist. He sees that in a allegedly, an important newspaper like the New York Times. He sees Tom Friedman saying that Israel isn't the Israel we used to know and love. He sees this, and He wants to be. I think he thinks this will make him more relevant. But it's remarkable. Why hasn't he didn't condemn the extreme left-wing government we had with Ra'am in it, with Meretz in it, and the Lapid government? He said nothing. That was okay. Never condemned it. And here he's condemning, you know, a properly elected religious Zionist party, which is really just saying the right things that any nationalist Zionist Jew would be saying. Nothing extreme. I mean, Ben Gvir says, why shouldn't Jews be allowed to pray in the Temple Mount if Muslims can? Of course they should be able to. And if someone is convicted of murder, there should be a death penalty. We have that here in this country. If someone, after serving a sentence, is a terrorist, then that person should be deported. These are reasonable positions, not extreme right-wing. What Foxman did was a disgrace. He only gave strength and legitimacy to the Jew haters in this country, to the anti-Israel organizations in this country. He should be ashamed of himself. If he was still the head of ADL, we'd be calling for him to be fired. But you know, when you have the articles by Tom Friedman and this other fellow I don't want to mention saying Israel shouldn't even exist, when you have Berkeley without any real pushback from Jewish organizations saying if you simply accept Israel's right to exist, you can condemn Israel's policies, you can be upset with everything Israel does, but if you accept Israel's right to exist, you cannot speak to our clubs. There should have been enormous pushback on that. Instead, the Jewish dean, Erwin Chemerinsky, I think is his name, of Berkeley, simply said, I find their policy troubling. Troubling? It's an anti-Semitic disgrace. He should have immediately, as we demanded, thrown every one of them out as a student club because they get funded by the University of California, Berkeley. They're given space. They should have immediately been thrown out. Just as when clubs and various universities have said terrible things against women or gays, they lost their rights as a student club.
You know, one of the things that's so stunning to me is that all of these statements are made without any attention being paid to what is actually happening on the ground in Israel. It's as if nothing happens here and nobody's responding to anything in the real world. I mean, just today it was reported, I think in a really stunning way. We have a superintendent of police, which is it's a police or inspector. It's a police general. It's a police version of of a major general. He's the first Arab Muslim uh, um, Israeli with this rank. His name is Jamal Khakrouch, and he was actually forced to into early retirement this year because in January he was filmed walking over the body of somebody who had just been critically wounded in a gunfight and just walking away and going to his car. And this is a guy who's supposed to be in charge of fighting crime in the Israeli Arab community. So, I mean, he showed such incredible indifference to the suffering of a victim of crime. And so he was forced out. But last week, I think it was, he participated in a rally in memory of 46 Arabs who were killed in Israel's War of Independence when they were fighting against the IDF. So he was at a memorial commemorating 46 enemy soldiers from the War of Independence in a town in the Galilee, and the event was overseen by Raed Salah, who's the head of the Islamic movement in the northern branch, and he's an ex-con, and he'll probably be back in soon because he uses every pulpit that he stands in to incite for Israel's annihilation and for terrorist activities against Israelis. So he's already sat in prison for that. He was banned from entering into the UK because of his support for Al Qaeda and other terrorist organizations. And here is this very senior, so just the second tier after the top, the chief of police of Israel, so he's sort of in the police general staff, and he's making common cause with enemy soldiers and with open enemies of the state of Israel. First and foremost, Raed Salah. And so these are the kinds of things that Israelis are looking at and having to contend with. And yet, anybody who calls for making loyalty to the existence of the state a condition for employment in places like the police or the army or any place that has responsibility for the lives of Israel citizens is automatically referred to as a racist. And again, this is without any context, without any understanding of anything that's actually happening on the ground in the Israeli Arab community, which is increasingly irredentist and violent, as we saw last May when President Trump was congratulating Rashida Tlaib for being a warrior when she was siding with pogromists and Hamas terrorists against Israel in the middle of a military campaign and a terror campaign internally inside of sovereign Israel in mixed Arab Israeli Arab Jewish cities. Um, and so, these are the kinds of things that people like Abe Foxman don't pay attention to. And two other people who aren't paying attention to them are, of course, David Miller and Dan Kurtzer, who wrote a stunning article in the Washington Post last week where they called for a weapons embargo against Israel and for the United States to torpedo the Abraham Accords by punishing the Arabs who signed peace deals with Israel, and so vacated the Palestinian veto of Arab Israeli peace. And they called for the United States to end its support for Israel at the UN Security Council and at the International Criminal Court at The Hague. So these are people who were supposedly interested in establishing peaceful relations between Israel and the Palestinians. One a former U.S. ambassador to Israel, Dan Kurtzer, and one a deputy Middle East peace envoy over, I think, three different U.S. administrations, Aaron Miller. And now they're saying, no, there's no peace. And so the United States should ditch any talk of peace, go straight for a hostile policy towards Israel. It's pretty stunning. And they're not only prominent in the foreign policy establishment, they're also very prominent in the American Jewish community. So again, these are statements theirs together with Foxman, which indicate that the United States, that the American Jewish community is not that into Israel
Kurtzer and
anymore, to put
Miller,
it mildly.
Martin Indyk, Dennis Ross have really been wrong about almost everything. They said Oslo will bring us peace. Arafat has changed. The Gaza withdrawal may bring us peace. They supported that. Of course, they've been supporting a state since day one, almost. I don't know why they have any credibility, why anyone wants to listen to them. Jewish organizations are constantly inviting Kurtzer and Aaron David Miller to come and speak and give and share their wisdom when they've been wrong about everything. No, that article was ludicrous and makes no sense. And people don't realize, as you mentioned, the context. I think there's been 7 terrorist attacks every day in the last 9 months in Israel. Several terrorist attacks. That's the context. And so Israel is not the same as America. Of course, we're getting there. And they have to really be worried about even just walking the street. They have a whole different set of issues they have to worry about, unlike Americans. And so they do not have the same types of perspective as America does. And we should be respecting that. But again, I think the Israeli leaders should be making clear that Mahmoud Abbas is a monster terrorist, that there's no occupation. I blame Jewish leaders and Israeli leaders for this situation. They're not educating the public with the truth of the Arab war against Israel.
I think you're right. Let me just ask you one final question for our conversation today, Mort. What where is this leading the American Jewish community?
It's interesting. There have been surveys where the Jews are asked the question, is Israel important to you? Among the Orthodox, you get about 90% saying yes. The conservative, about 45% conservative Jews. Reform, 22%. 45 among conservative Jews, 22% among Reform Jews. The closer one is to caring about the Torah, our Bible, which is the basis of the Jewish people and the basis of Israel, the closer people are to Israel. I think we have to really be emphasizing in America more Jewish day school education, making it more affordable, having more Jewish day schools to teach kids this, because we're losing support of the Jewish people and the Jewish leadership for Israel, as you see now with this Foxman, Tom Friedman, and this other journalist, who, by the way, sends his kids to day schools and yet comes out and says Israel should not exist as a Jewish state. So I'm
Peter Beinart.
yes, I didn't want to mention his name because I didn't want him to enjoy the fact that his name is mentioned. As I said before, Israel has to make it clear There's leadership. Mahmoud Abbas is a monster. We can't deal with them. They pay people to murder Jews. Jerusalem has never been holy to Muslims. It's not in the Quran. Uh, there is no occupation. Explaining that there is no occupation. A Palestinian state would be a terrorist state. I mean, Syria, Iran, and North Korea have states. Are they lovely? A Palestinian state does not resolve anything. It only gives more strength to promoting their agenda if they have their own sovereign state.
All right. Well, I appreciate that very much, Mort. I think you're right. And I would also just add that I think that American Jews who don't understand the right of the Jewish people to their land, all of their land, are also not going to, and we're already seeing it on the street, are not capable of defending themselves in America against anti-Semitism that's actually targeting them, whether it's in the Palestinian-based form of BDS or black supremacism or white supremacism, although white supremacism perhaps is a little bit easier to defend against. But if you don't know who you are and you don't know why you have rights, then you can't defend them when they're under attack.
Well, thank you for your work. Your columns are a great educational tool for me. I learned so much from you and other Jews. You're one of the few people that told about the entire truth of the Arab-Islamic war against Israel and the West. So I'm grateful.
Well, I appreciate that, and I commend the ZOA for its vital work and for you leading it in that work for so many years. And we're going to have you back on soon. And let's just hope that your voice is going to be resonating where it's supposed to be resonating in the
Well, in
hearts
the
and minds
last
of
two
the
weeks,
American Jews,
I've been
particularly.
quoted in the New York Times twice in the last 2 weeks, including the very front page. So we've been getting lots of media lately.
All right, well, good. I'm glad to hear that. And good luck with all your legal work fighting the anti-Semites. So again, thank you guys. Look at all the work that the ZOA does at ZOA.org. And Mort also writes quite often at jns.org, as does Liz Burney, I think, who works with you, and other very excellent people at the ZOA. So I appreciate everything that you've done,
Susan
and look forward to
Susan
having
Tuckman, the head of our legal division, she was in the forefront of changing Title VI to cover Jews. So we filed more lawsuits against universities because of anti-Semitism than any organization in America, and that was led by Susan Tuckman.
So important. Such a great group. All right, well, guys, thanks so much for watching us this week, and we'll see you again next week. Take care.